Thank you all for joining us. And Madeline, the artist, Madeline, my spouse, and these will be behind me here. And as human beings, we can talk about these ideas, but I feel that having the images of the animals themselves is in some ways far more articulate than any human can ever be. Because these beings are really in many ways in our hands. Their welfare is in our hands. We can harm them or we can let them live their lives. And I am an advocate of letting them live their lives. So I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the main ideas here, which are universal. The main thing I'd like to emphasize here from the very beginning is that this whole message that I'm sharing is basically good news, right? The underlying message is a very positive, it's an extremely positive message. The good news is that all of us as human beings have been given the gift of a physical body, right? We wouldn't be here if we didn't have one of those. We have a physical body, here we are. This physical body that we are functioning through does not require any animals to suffer to get all the nutrients that we need to be healthy. So that's the really good news. There's no nutrients that somehow animals have in them that they didn't get from plants. So that basic idea, I think, is enormously liberating. That means that the billions of animals that we're killing every single day as human beings and causing enormous violence to them and to ecosystems and to our society and really to our health is completely unnecessary. It's really no reason. I mean, here I am. I've been a vegan for actually 42 years now, and there's millions of people like me who have been long-term vegans and who are doing great. So probably better, I would say, just as well, or probably much better, right, Jim, than the average human person in terms of health. So we can go into these ideas more in depth, but that's the basic idea, that plants provide all the nutrients that we need to thrive. The problem is that we've all been born into a culture where we had a herding revolution. I write about this in the World Peace Diet about 10,000 years ago, where for some reason, and anthropologists don't really know why exactly, about 10,000 years ago in what is today Iraq, people started to herd animals, like own them as property. Like these are our wild sheep it was first, then wild goats, and then other animals. And so that marked the last great revolution in our society, in this culture that we're in. It changed everything. I always say that the revolutions since then that we talk about, the scientific revolution or the communications revolution, industrial revolution, all that, they're not revolutions. We can kill and eat more animals faster than ever. It didn't change our basic orientation, but the herding revolution totally transformed our basic orientation toward animals, toward nature, toward each other, men and women, the universe, everything. It changed it, and I would say in a way that's leading directly into more and more escalating violence, war, injustice, inequality, and environmental devastation. So the good news is it's all unnecessary. That we're not some kind of a species that has this flaw where we're always going to be warring with each other and fighting with each other and having injustice and a wealthy elite dominating everybody. That's basically all the fruits of an obsolete food system, because the food system, not only are we eating those foods, but we are eating the attitudes. These attitudes are injected into us with our meals. It's so liberating to understand this, actually. I did a lot of study in social psychology, anthropology, and so forth. And anthropologists understand that every society replicates itself, right? That's what they do. And they do it through their language and institutions, and especially their rituals. And the main ritual in every society is meals. When people sit down at the table and eat food, you're not just eating food. This is something we do. It's the most intimate connection we have with nature, right? Eating, you don't get more intimate than that, right? This becomes this vehicle, right? It's very intimate. It's also our most intimate connection with our society. So we're eating attitudes. And what I've discovered is the attitudes that we're eating when we're eating animal-based foods are counterproductive. They're not in our best interest if we want to be healthy and create a world of harmony and peace, because they're attitudes of domination and exploitation of the weak by the strong, privilege and elitism, disconnectedness, the domination of the feminine, because animal agriculture is really about not just humans dominating animals, but more specifically and more accurately, it's about male human beings dominating female animals. That's really what it is. You have to breed them against their will on a massive scale and then steal and kill their babies and breed them again. So there's a lot of sexual abuse involved in animal agriculture. This is all sort of hidden, but It's right that we're doing it and we're eating it. And yet it's covered up. And so this is part of what Carl Jung talked about, the shadow. The shadow archetype is what we are, but what we say, oh, we're not that. But then what we do with the shadow archetype is it basically dulls our awareness, so we don't really understand what's happening. But then we also, besides dulling our awareness, we then always project it, right? So the violence that we're committing, we're good, loving people. We just like having a good steak and lobster and fish sticks and so forth. But there's other people that are really violent. So we got to make a lot of weapons and fight against them. So this whole idea is to simply, again, realize it's an obsolete food orientation that we've inherited and has passed through the generations. The big powers, really, in our world today, I think can be, in a sense, seen as two basic powers. One of the powers is the power of each one of us as an individual, right? The power of the individual is what we need to celebrate and to honor and to fulfill, because each one of us as an individual has enormous potential to learn, to grow, to awaken, to transform our world. Actually, as individuals, we impact other individuals and we impact society. But the other big power is the community, the group, the society. This is the dynamic tension. So the thing to understand is when we leave here and go out into the world and we see people going out into restaurants and supermarkets and taking out their wallets, I always like to remind people, if I can get this out, is that these right here are ballots masquerading as dollars. These are ballots that always do get counted. No matter what, they get counted. And I'm not sure about the other ballots anymore, but these ballots do get counted. And they're counted very accurately, and so if I vote for meat, dairy products, and eggs, somewhere because of my vote, an animal is definitely going to be killed. And the whole thing, it's a whole cascade of violence that goes into effect from our purchases. So the thing to remember is that when we go out into the world and we see people taking out their wallets and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs, that's in many ways where the crime, in a sense, is committed. That's where the violence starts. But then we turn around and we eat the violence, right? And we teach our children to do that. And I did that. I ate, lots of meat, dairy, and eggs growing up. But the thing to remember is that no one does that of a free choice. That's never like a free choice that someone just decides to do. Oh, I'm going to have some meat. I'm going to have some mammary secretions from a bovine animal. We never think of that on our own in a million years. So this is something that the only reason anyone does this is because we're following orders. We just do what we're told. I did it because of my mother and my father and my teacher and my minister and my doctor and all my friends and neighbors and relatives and everybody, right? And the media and the news TV and everybody. I could never question it in a million years. I just ate a lot of meat, dairy, and eggs because that's what we did. The good news in that is, essentially, is that it's not a free choice. It's a choice that essentially we're compelled into without our permission. But since it's so early on by people we trust completely, it gets like hardwired into us. And it's tribal. See, we human beings are very tribal. We're not rational, really. I think we all know that, right? If we were rational, the world would have been vegan a long time ago. We wouldn't have to travel around and do all this. It doesn't make sense to grow huge amounts of grain and douse it with chemicals and herbicides and pesticides and then feed animals all that and pollute all the rivers and eat all that stuff. And it's filled with saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying and inflammatory animal protein, causes all kinds of disease, and creates food shortages, which create wars. I mean, it's just, it's like if you had your scientists trying to come up with a system to maximize disease and violence and environmental devastation and misery, you couldn't come up with a better system. So it's completely anti-rational, but it's tribal. This is what we do, right? This is who we are, this is who I am, this is what I like. Food is our most intimate connection with the tribe. If someone came along in a tribal situation and said, well, I'm not going to eat your food anymore, right? That's unthinkable. You go out and die in the wilderness then, get out of here. If Madeline and I show up somewhere and we say, well, we're vegans, it's like, you're not in our tribe, get out of here. It's a very deep challenge to the status quo to question the food. But I think we're at the point where we need to question the official narratives in our society. I think we can see that a lot of the official narratives in our society are really not necessarily promoting peace and harmony and love and abundance and health and sustainability. And animal agriculture, what I've discovered in my research, is really the primary spinning fury at the core of our culture that is causing so much devastation. And so as individuals, we have the power to question that. I can't make someone else change. We might try to do that. You know, as vegans, we want to make everybody change. The only person I can really change is this one. And the good news, again, is that what veganism is, it's not, in a way I don't like the word vegan because it sort of divides everybody. You're a vegan or you're not a vegan. It's just love, really. It's loving kindness, it's respect, it's caring for other beings, for animals, for indigenous people, for hungry people, for slaughterhouse workers who have to stab animals, and for future generations, and for wildlife. And you know, it's a whole infinite, it's like a really infinite mandala or web of beings that we're connected to. You know, we're all interconnected. It's trying to do the best I can to just send out benevolence and love and joy and freedom and liberation into the infinite web of relations. That's the idea, and just do the best I can to do that in the face of a system that in many ways is training us from the time we're infants not to do that, to see other beings as instruments to get what we want, and especially if the beings have less power than we do, right? They're just vulnerable in our hands. You can, they taste good, and they just, whatever you do, they don't fight back. Whatever you do, they don't sue you. Whatever you do, they can't pass laws to stop it. So that's our real moral test. That's the moral test of us as human beings, and I think that's the thing we've failed, unfortunately. But the good news, I would say, is that it's growing, right? We see more and more evidence that people are moving toward understanding this. Behind me, we see the koala bears hanging onto the earth for dear life, hoping she has someplace to live, because the animals have been marginalized. I've read about this in the World Peace Diet, actually. It's kind of an interesting thing. About 10,000 years ago, before animal agriculture, 99% of the biomass of animals was non-human animals, and 1% of the biomass was human beings. Right, the biomass being the weight of the bodies, that 10,000 years ago. Now, just 10,000 years later, which is just a finger snap, a very short amount of time later, you know, in the history of the world, we human beings and the animals that we own as livestock, as property, actually, because it includes dogs and cats and all the animals we own, we are now 98% of the biomass. And so wild animals have gone from being 99% of the biomass on the earth to 2%. So we've basically taken it away, and it's just as bad, really, for the marine animals. The oceans have been completely strip mined of fish. So now over 2/3 of the fish we're eating are factory farmed, because they aren't left. Fish are gone out of the ocean. We just have these very efficient trawlers that just get literally all the fish. We're devastating the planet because of animal agriculture, and it's because of not just the fact that it takes a huge amount of resources to feed people an animal-based meals. You have to destroy rainforests, and you have to destroy oceans. If you want everybody to be eating meat, and dairy and eggs, really, the planet's not big enough. That's what the scientists say. We would need 3 Earths if everybody ate like Americans, right? Or some scientists say 4. It's extremely wasteful, but if we make a change, we can absolutely create this beautiful world. There's really nothing stopping us. There's nothing objectively stopping us from walking down a path toward a very positive, beautiful future. The template of animal agriculture is toward a complete hell realm for animals. It is a hell realm for them. Madeline and I have been to slaughterhouses and stockyards and factory farms, and these animals are in horrific conditions. And the same thing is going to happen to us, right? I mean, if we sow seeds, we reap the results. If we're going to insist on pushing billions and billions of animals for hundreds and hundreds of years into horrifically violent, horrible lives of misery, and steal their purposes and steal their children and sexually abuse them and physically abuse them, why do we think we deserve to have peace and harmony and justice for ourselves when all we do is inflict misery and violence on those who are vulnerable in our hands, and we don't talk about it, right? This is not part of the conversation in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or the BBC, or NPR, or anywhere else. You have to come to the Black Mountain Center for Active Aging to hear about this, right? It's this grassroots kind of whispered secret teachings that most people don't want to hear, right? Don't upset the apple cart, or the meat cart, I should say. We have these two complementary forces, the individual and the community. The only reason the individual gets submerged and our basic will and compassion and intelligence gets reduced so that we're eating animal foods is because of the power of the community to indoctrinate us into something that is not in our best interest. It's not in our best interest to be eating animal foods. Anyone who's taking out their wallet and exploiting animals is actually going to be exploited themselves. We're sowing the seeds of exploiting. The hospitals are filling up with people who are there because of eating animal foods, right? They're getting quadruple heart bypass and diabetes and obesity and osteoporosis and liver disease and kidney disease and Alzheimer's and dementia and all kinds of horrific things from eating this so-called food. And so we're sowing the seeds of misery and violence and disease, and we're reaping that. But again, the good news is it's completely unnecessary. We don't need to do that. The most important thing, I think, is to understand how these things operate. I was born and raised in Massachusetts, in Concord, Massachusetts, back in the 1950s. There was a couple of things that were interesting about Concord because it was the beginning of the Revolutionary War. If you remember, in 1775, hardly a man is now alive who remembers the famous day and year of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Paul Revere would say, the British are coming, so we gotta defend ourselves. So the basic idea that I learned growing up, because every April 19th, which is Patriots Day, my father would go and get up dressed in his Minuteman outfit and go and get the gun off the wall, and we would all go down to the Old North Bridge in Concord, and we would reenact the battle, and we would send the British back to Boston, and we would shoot them the whole way, right? So the whole idea is if you have a system of tyranny, don't tolerate it. Come on. I mean, we got one life here. We shouldn't be living as slaves. That teaching is very important. The forefathers of our country were all about freedom. And freedom, I think, is critical. It's the sovereignty of us as individuals and respecting that and having systems that respect that. Animals have to be included as well, obviously. And then later, in the 1800s, another kind of a revolution called the Transcendentalist movement. And so I was born in Emerson Hospital and learned to swim in Walden Pond and went to Thoreau School and Alcott School. So these guys, they were actually experimenting with vegetarianism back then. And they had the very first vegan community right outside Concord called Fruitlands, where they didn't eat any meat, dairy, or eggs, and they wouldn't wear leather or wool, or they wouldn't even wear cotton. This was back in the 1840s. Came from slavery. They didn't, we're going to pay for that. So they were trying to ethically minimize violence, right? They said, we're not going to buy animal foods, we're not going to buy slave products. That's, to me, is what veganism is. It's just trying to live a life where we are consequent and to try to support harmony and not support violence. I didn't know about it when I was a kid, and my father was kind of an interesting guy. He wanted to be a doctor. He was a medic in World War II in France, and he told me as a little kid that he didn't like it. He didn't like being a doctor. It was so much blood and misery, and plus all he did was give vaccinations all day. So he said, oh man, he said, stay away from doctors if you possibly can. That was his motto. And so I've kind of embraced that, and the last time I went to a doctor was in 1972. I haven't had health insurance, I haven't needed to. Never gone to a pharmacy or drugstore for anything except we buy occasionally some Band-Aids or something like that. But all in all, I've tried to do the best I can to take responsibility for my health and not support the pharmaceutical industry, the medical industry. And so what he did, instead of being a doctor, is he bought a newspaper. So I was raised in this swirling, amazing world of a local small town newspaper. And then he was good, and he had a chain of 13 newspapers by the time I was in college. So anyway, from that I learned, besides not trusting the medical, I learned not to trust the media because I know it in my bones, because the conversations that my father would have with my mother sometimes, where we can't run this news story because if we did, the advertisers would object and they'd pull their ads. So I just know not to trust the media, because as soon as you turn on the TV, as soon as you open a newspaper or a magazine or turn on the radio, you're not getting anything but the message that the advertisers want you to get. And the biggest advertisers are the big food companies, the junk food companies, the fast food companies, the pharmaceutical industry, the petrochemical industry, car industry, the banks. But all of them, they don't want this message I'm giving right now out there. This is not what they want. They haven't made any money on me, right? In 50 years, I haven't been to a doctor. I haven't bought a drug of any kind in 50 years. That's like, I'm their worst nightmare. They don't want anyone to hear what I'm saying. So the media is not our friend. The media is controlled by a tiny, wealthy elite. And it's very important to understand that. It's the same wealthy elite that controls all the institutions in our society. You just saw a picture of that beautiful harvest, and now you see a picture of Fiona the pig who jumped over a fence and escaped. We met her in upstate New York. When we see those beautiful, the foods over here, these plant-based foods, we naturally are drawn to them. When we see this, we don't think, oh, I can't wait to just bite into her flesh. It's completely alien, really, to us. We have to learn. We have to have our natural awareness just suppressed in order to do that. But as a little kid, growing up in Concord, Massachusetts, we ate lots of meat, dairy, and eggs in my family, like all the families. And I remember when I was about 7 years old, I asked my mother about the food. And I said, Mom, the kind of food we're eating, is this what everybody eats? And my mother pretty much just said, yeah, what we eat's pretty normal. And we talked a little bit about it, and then she left. And then she came back, and I still remember this, and she said, I'm sorry, that's not true. Actually, there are vegetarians. And I kind of pricked up and I said, what the heck is that? I was at the age when I liked learning like long words, vegetarian. I was like, wow, that's a good one. What the heck is a vegetarian? And my mother, I remember she thought for a minute, she said, a vegetarian, well, don't worry, you're never gonna meet one. I don't know where they get their protein, she said. In my young mind, I already knew I didn't like vegetarians. I knew that they were very rare because my mother was very old and she never met one. And I knew they were, I knew they were sick and weak because they didn't get enough protein. And I knew protein was good. So I didn't want to be a vegetarian. I just didn't even want to see one. And so I went through my life growing up, and we did okay. We had a lot of the usual things that kids have, like sore throats, runny noses, earaches. My brother always had earaches. I had appendicitis, all dairy, right? Dairy just fills up the hospital, and especially with children, because we're not little calves. Casein wreaks havoc on us, but nobody talks about it. And type 1 diabetes, we didn't have that, but a lot of people do. It's all from dairy. But anyway, so when I got to be about 13 years old, I remember going away to a summer camp in Vermont, which was nestled in the Green Mountains, and it had a little farm kind of affiliated with the summer camp, and we would work on the farm sometimes. And one of the things we used to do every year was I was taught to catch my own chicken, how to hold her down, have my axe, cut her head off, put her through the scalding tank after she had no head, and then pluck them, and then we would eat the chickens. I did it. I didn't really have a big problem with it. I didn't like it, but it was like, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. I was old enough. I was 13 years old. I could kill my own chickens, and no problem. And we would kill them, and we would eat them. And I had gone through at that point 13 years of the most intense indoctrination a human being can go through, right? 13 years of three times a day, I was eating the narrative, the story that God gave us certain animals to eat. They don't have a soul. They taste really good. And if you don't eat them, you're definitely going to die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency. So that's it. That's just how we live. This is what we do. I got to, do this for a number of years, and then also every year, at least one time, we would gather around one of the dairy cows, and that was much more shocking, just because it's almost a 2,000-pound huge animal, which we would put a gun right here and we pull the trigger. Usually on the third or fourth bullet, she would collapse. The guy had this long knife, and he would go at it, and there would be blood just skyrocketing up and all this, and urine and feces gushing. I mean, it was really like, whoa. And I remember he would kind of wipe his brow very calmly after he did it, the whole thing. He said, you got to do that. You got to cut those arteries, because otherwise the meat would be soggy. Right? And we don't like soggy meat. So you can't that's why the animals suffer so much. I understand that. All the animals, because we can't just sort of kill an animal and then come back later and cut them up, and no. That's disgusting, it's full of blood. So all the animals that we're eating have to be hung upside down, typically by one or two legs, and have their carotid arteries cut, and so they bleed out. So their heart has to actively bleed out, be beating and bleed out the blood, which is really the most painful, terrifying way to die there is, but that's what we do to them, because we don't want soggy meat. We don't want blood. So I saw all that, but I couldn't begin to question it. And now I understand so much better, because the thing is, on any dairy, organic or not, you have to kill the cows when they're about 5 years old, because they are worn out by the time they're 5 years old. Even though they would live to be 25 years old, naturally, they're pregnant and lactating simultaneously, which breaks down the health of any female mammal very quickly, so they're just worn out. So one of the calves will be a slave on the dairy, the other three or four, however many she's had, will usually just be killed. So I saw all that and participated in it, but I still couldn't question it. So anyway, I left home and went to college, and like my mother said, I heard there were some vegetarians on campus, but I never actually met one. This was in Maine in the early 70s. And then I started questioning just the Vietnam War was going on and a lot of things. So I started reading the Bible and reading some other spiritual books. I started doing some yoga, some meditation. And I decided with my younger brother, Ed, to leave home right after college in 1975 and go to California, right? And we decided we would walk. We'll just walk to California, go on a pilgrimage. And so we did. We actually went down the driveway and I said goodbye to my parents. We had some fresh baked cookies from my mother and we were heading off and walking. And after about a month and a half or so, we had gotten as far as Buffalo. And it was already freezing. It was October. So we decided to head south just to stay ahead of the cold front. We actually walked all the way down through upstate New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, into Tennessee, and eventually into Alabama. But in Tennessee, we stopped for a while at a community called The Farm. And The Farm in 1975, it was about a couple hours south of Nashville, and it was the largest hippie commune in the world, and they were mostly from California. So we kind of felt like they met us in the middle, and they were all vegetarians. They said, we're vegetarians. I had eaten meat my entire life up until hitting The Farm. And then when we got to The Farm, there was these 900 people. They were actually vegans because there was no meat or dairy or eggs, but no one could say vegan because no one ever heard of the word. Back in 1975, said we're vegetarians. And they had about 200 children that were vegan from birth, and they were all thriving. Everybody was thriving. They weren't dragging themselves through the dirt, begging for protein. That was very powerful because that was an example of a community living in another way, like another way of living. And so, so that's the whole point, is that the only reason I ate animal foods all those years I did was because of the community I was raised in. I just ate what they ate. But then when I saw this other way of eating, and I asked them about it, I said, so why are you guys vegetarian? And they said, well, there's two main reasons. One reason is that most of the food we're growing, we're feeding to animals while people are starving. And hungry people cause conflict and war, so we're eating lower on the food chain so there's enough for everyone to eat. So we don't waste all this food by feeding it to animals. We could feed everyone, they said. We could feed everyone on the planet on a fraction of the land if people would just eat vegetarian, vegan, plant-based. And I said, wow, that's great. What's the other reason? It's such good news, really. And the other reason, he said, the other reason is, do you know what the animals go through? And he told me a little bit. I said, no, I don't want to hear about it. But he told me a little bit about the mutilations and just the violence toward these animals. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow. But the beautiful thing was that I had a living example of 900 people, of all ages, and I was eating with them and learning how to, you can imagine hippie food, right? It was big, huge pans of rice and beans and some vegetables. Tofu, we had the tofu dairy there, we made the very first ever, we called it vegetarian ice cream. It was called Ice Bean. It was terrible, but we thought, it's pretty good, not too bad, Made from soybeans. So I was in it right from the very beginning there, and it was great, but that was it. So I've never eaten meat in my life, actually, since that day that guy told me that at the farm in Tennessee. I realized it's not necessary. I had the example. I saw what we were eating together, and there wasn't any animal flesh around, so I've never eaten meat in my life since that day. And I remember when I met Madeline many years later, and we were comparing notes, and it was like, wow, that's amazing. So the same month and year, this young Swiss artist decided to never eat meat again in her life too. So we've had that kind of far away connection. But the thing that's interesting is that then a couple of years later, in 1980, well, 5 years later, 1980, I became a vegan. I kind of figured out about dairy and eggs. And then a few years after that, I was living in these meditation centers at that point in California, mainly Zen, Buddhist meditation. And I decided to become a monk. So I went over to South Korea. I shaved my head. I was living in a monastery in South Korea. And it was very intense meditation community there. It was a training center. It was the main training center actually in Korea. And so I was there. We were getting up every morning for the 3 o'clock meditation. We'd start at 3 o'clock in the morning. We'd go till 9 o'clock at night. And it was just a lot of sitting, just all day, just in silence on the floor, But it was what was so empowering to me, partly, was that this community was vegan, and they'd been practicing this for about close to 800 years. I guess since the 1100s, in this community, there had been no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no wool, no silk, no leather, no killing of animals or even of insects if you could help it. So the whole idea was to practice. The word is ahimsa. Maybe you've heard of that word, ahimsa, which is a Sanskrit word that means non-violence. So just try to minimize violence to other living beings, that's the foundation for spiritual practice. It's the foundation for a society of harmony and peace. As soon as we start committing violence unnecessarily on others, we sow the seeds not only for misery for them, right, we're hurting them, but it always boomerangs. Whatever we sow comes back. That's the main spiritual teaching. I eventually ended up teaching college courses in comparative religion. And I love studying the world religions and seeing how similar they really are in their core teaching. And the core teaching, I think, if we distill it down, would be whatever you most want for yourself, give that to others, right? That's the basic thing. So if I want to be free, let others be free. As soon as I start imprisoning and controlling others, I end up the same thing happening to me. If I want to be loved, be loving. As soon as I'm not loving others, it comes back. If I want to have an abundant life, be generous, right? The more we give, the more it comes back. So these basic teachings, we all know when we hear that, it resonates in our bones, in our soul. We know this is true. So, but we've been raised in a society where animals have been left out of that, right? We can do what we want. Somehow it doesn't matter with them. Even though, like how many of you have a companion animal or have ever had one, like a dog or a cat, or some of you have, right? So you know that there's a being in there, right? When you look into her eyes, there's someone in there, and that she has interests which are to her as important to her as my interests are to me. See, that's the key thing. Their interests are to them as important to them as my interests are to me. So if I absolutely refuse to respect their interests and just hyper-confine them or mutilate them or cause misery to them, that suffering is significant. It would be the same thing if some superior species started doing that to me because I taste good, and I would hope that they would see that my suffering is significant. But if they don't think, they just think, well, you taste good, I don't care if you're suffering. We would think that's a really hideous, cruel, blind being. But that's what we are, and it's not our fault. It's just that we've been indoctrinated into behavior to eat animal foods and not think of the consequences, not see the consequences of our actions, but they come back. Just because we don't see them, when we sow seeds, it's going to come up. It'll come up somehow, whether we pretend to see it or not. And it comes up as war, as disease, pandemics, injustice, violence, families fighting, all these things. So to just understand this, make the connection, and then we can bring our life into alignment with that. So when I was in Korea, it was a very, very empowering to be in such a community that this had been practiced for so many centuries, and then also to be just sitting in silence for so many thousands of hours and just realizing, I guess is part, if I can say it, how my mind had been colonized. It was just taking time out and just listening, for months, and then eventually realizing that it was like my mind had been covered with clouds from the time I was born, pretty much. We're born, and then we learn a language, and we get an identity. Our parents are telling all these things. So it's like this conditioning, this cloud of conditioning comes in, and there we are, and we identify with the conditioning. But if I realized if I quieted my mind enough and just listened, that eventually the clouds would part and I could glimpse for a moment or a few moments this infinite radiant sky of eternal awareness, of eternal life, really, which is our true nature. And what we are was never born and will never die. What we are is infinite and eternal consciousness, and we are of the nature of love. That's our true nature. And we can have an experience of that in some way. We get quiet enough that we're not this physical body. We are what makes this possible. And then when we see that, I think, in ourselves, we begin to see it in others, and we can even begin to see it in animals, and we can begin to see there's a being there who's a being, not just a piece of meat. So the great wound of animal agriculture is materialism. That's really the key. It inflicts materialism on humanity. So we live in a materialistic society, not just materialistic in the sense of, being consumeristic, but philosophically materialistic. Like we believe nothing exists unless we can see it, feel it, measure it. If you want to enslave people, you get them to believe in materialism. That's how you enslave people. Easily, they'll go right into slavery, because then we just think of ourselves as an object. We're afraid. We want to try to manipulate each other. Taking away our spiritual wisdom, shutting that down through animal agriculture. That's been the great in a way, the great satanic power grab over humanity is animal agriculture. And it's essential for us to connect with the sacred feminine dimension of life, which is about caring and about seeing the being and not seeing them as a thing. Because the thing is, we live in a society, I mean, think of this, it's almost hard to tolerate living in such a society where every day millions of animals, beings, are sold by the pound, right? That's happening millions and millions, hundreds of millions of times every day all around us. Animals are sold by the pound. You just raise them, sell them. Can you imagine selling a being by the pound? You can't get more deluded and demonic, but we do that, and then we eat that. And it's not, I'm not blaming anyone, I'm not criticizing or anything. It's just this is the society that evolved. And the World Peace Diet, I talked about how it got that, how it all happened. But so we're raised in that society. And that society, if it gets a powerful technology of surveillance or of nuclear weapons, all these things, it's not going to have a positive future. We have to understand that. We do have a way out. We do have a way forward. And the way forward is what we call veganism. It's liberating animals. If we want to have freedom and health for ourselves, we can have it. It's totally available. But the price we have to pay is to give it to others. Give it to those beings who are in our hand, who actually would love to have their purposes and to be able to live their lives and celebrate their lives as they were designed to, and they did for millions of years until we came along and started imprisoning them and abusing them completely unnecessarily. So let them live their lives, then we will then be able to do that. And we'll be able to free ourselves from materialism. The curse of materialism, which destroys really our connection with nature and the sacredness of life and the sacredness of our life around us. That's stolen from us. The World Peace Diet is it's a big book, and there's a lot in here. The audiobook is 13 and a half hours long, and it's me reading the whole book pretty fast, and I don't repeat anything. And so there's a huge amount of information, but I could stand here for 13 and a half hours and talk about all this, but as a vegan, I don't like to cause unnecessary suffering to sentient beings, so I won't do that. But basically, I'm just trying to sort of summarize some of the main points and that I think are so important, but hopefully encourage you to go deeper with this, because shallow veganism, it's great, but very often it withers away and people go back again to eating animals, or they get confused. So deep veganism is really important. I wrote the World Peace Diet to kind of help people understand the deeper structure of our society and why we have the problems we have, and also how to be effective in our advocacy. Because very often when we're vegans, we're trying to just change other people, and we're just making it worse. 10,000 years ago, when we started owning animals as property for food in what is today Iraq, about 7 things happened. Right? It was like this cascade, gradually, slow motion, like over thousands of years. Number one, animals were reduced. They went from being mysterious and respected to being property, right? Again, it took a long time. It was slow. It was wild sheep, then wild goats, then wild cows, and then other animals. So they were reduced to being either property or to being pests. We got to get rid of those prairie dogs and wolves and coyotes and so forth, because they might interfere with our property, our wealth. So that was number one. Number two was it gave rise for the first time on planet Earth of a wealthy elite class. There's a certain tiny elite class that, again, gradually over thousands of years emerged, and they began to lord it over everyone else. They were, if you read the oldest books that you can find, and I used to teach college courses in the oldest books, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the ancient Old Testament writings. You just read these, there's these kings, right? They're always kings, and the kings is only one, and then there's thousands of other people below them, and they dominate. They have life and death power, and the only reason they're kings is because they have livestock. Livestock is wealth. They own sheep and goats and cows, and so that gave rise to capitalism, right? Because the word capita it means head in Latin. So, owning the means of production of wealth, which was livestock, was the means of production of wealth. But that led to war. There had never been war on planet Earth until we had animal agriculture. And the very oldest word for war is the ancient word gavia, which means the desire for more cows. Right? That was the first word for war, because when a rich king had a lot of wealth, a lot of capital, he would want to get some more, right? And so that's what war has always been. And when the rich want to get richer, right, they go to war. So he'd see another guy with a lot of capital. He'd say, we're going to go take that capital. But of course, they wouldn't give up without a fight. So there would be these huge battles. Whoever lost the war, the livestock would become the property of the victor. So they get much richer. The land, they need the land for their livestock and the water. You got to get that too. But also the people. So animal agriculture gave rise to war and to slavery. The first slavery was because of these wars. And that's a very sobering, important point, which is that whatever we've done to animals, sooner or later we did to other human beings. And so it's a small, relatively small step to owning animals as property. Well, I own you as property. Now I'm going to impregnate you, and I'm going to have babies, and we're going to sell those slaves. And so slave trade became very lucrative. And so the enslavement of animals and the enslavement of humans arose in the Eastern Mediterranean. You can read about it, right? You can read those ancient texts. And then also two other things. Women's status was declined because animal agriculture is based on reducing the female to a breeder. You see the female as merely a breeder. You just impregnate her, and then you want to manipulate. You want to breed with, you want to breed in a way that you have big cows or big sons or whatever it is. So again, this led eventually to the enslavement of women. Women are bought and sold like cows and pigs and sheep and so forth in these ancient books. They're owned as property. And then that led also to unfortunately, also to the indoctrination of boys to have a role model of hard, tough, disconnected men, right? So boys are encouraged to be hard and tough and disconnected and capable of violence towards animals, towards women, towards rival herders. And so we have the arising in the Eastern Mediterranean of a very warlike patriarchal society that spread from there to the Northern Mediterranean and then into Central Asia and then into Europe and then spread from there worldwide, and it's still spreading right now. We saw it when we go to Africa, when we go to Asia, when we go anywhere. You see McDonald's, Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Wendy's, and you see the IMF and the World Bank, and you see Monsanto, and you see all these, Bayer, I guess it is now, all these Cargill and all these corporations that are based on animal agriculture, and the whole system, I call it the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media, banking complex. Right? We have this complex, and it works very well to basically suck all the money into the hands of a tiny elite and pull away and really take away and steal the health of ecosystems, the health of animals, the health of human beings, take away their money, their health, their happiness, just suck it out, dominate them through dominating governmentally and through the media and economically and politically. That's the thing. If the main tool is animal agriculture, if you want to make animals into livestock, then we as human beings will become livestock. That's what happens. We view animals as livestock, and then we get viewed as livestock. To break that, we are called to liberate animals, and it has to happen at the grassroots level. That's really, everything happens at a grassroots level. We can't expect we're going to be saved, I don't think, by some benevolent dictator or whatever, Klaus Schwab or whoever it is, going to come and save us. I don't think so. I think we have to rise up, and it's really what I call the resurrection of the sacred feminine, the resurrection of Sophia. I have a chapter in the World Peace Diet called The Domination of the Sacred Feminine. And really, I think that's the key thing, is that one of the main attitudes we're eating, if we're eating animal foods, is the suppression of Sophia. And Sophia was the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom. So it's this feminine wisdom that yearns to nurture and love and protect life that is most suppressed by animal agriculture. And that's the problem, because when that happens, then we don't object when corporations destroy our ecosystems, when they subject our children to ads that are pornographic or violent and try to get them to buy products that are unhealthy, all this stuff. Sophia would never allow that. She'd be rising up, no, I want to protect the children, the ecosystem, the community, the world. But you suppress Sophia through animal agriculture and having people eat the flesh and secretions of tortured animals day after day after day, then Sophia's down, and the population is easily enslaved. We're called, I think, to just understand this. Again, we don't have to blame anyone. We have to just see that these systems evolved, and we're born into that, and it's gone through the generations. And there's that saying, I really like it. Like, some people will say, well, diabetes just runs in my family. Heart disease runs in the family. cancer runs in the family. And I say, yeah, it ran in the family until it ran into me. That's the basic idea. Like each one of us as an individual, we can stop it. And we can say, all right, it came running in the family, all this stuff, because everybody in the family had their legs under the same dinner table and were eating the same food and ingesting the same set of attitudes. But at some point, we can question that, and then we can be the force to help our society move in a positive direction, a positive evolution. And that, I think, is the greatest gift we can give to the world right now. I mean, right now the world needs this more than anything. The beautiful thing is that each one of us does make a difference. I mean, each one of us really does make a difference. The more people who understand this and do the best we can to help liberate animals and to help share these ideas with others, then that's helping to basically percolate a liberating influence out into the whole web of relations that can really positively transform our world. And that, I think, is what does it. So it's important to understand what veganism is, but also at a deeper level, the programming of our society, and to do the inner work. I think that's important. Because I think there's these 3 stages in veganism, which is number 1, the first stage, like when someone hears the message, right? They watch a YouTube video of some poor cow being stabbed, or they hear whatever, they say, okay, I'm gonna go vegan. So that's the beginning stage, and that's a very difficult stage. I mean, it's hard to go vegan in our society. If going vegan in this society, you're going against everything. And your parents or your teachers or your friends, neighbors, whoever it is, don't like it. We have to learn nutrition, we need to learn foods, we need to learn what to say to people when they say, well, you're going vegan, but that's ridiculous because you're killing carrots and they're screaming, or they'll say, cows will take over the earth if you don't eat them, or oh, I didn't know that, what do I do now? So, we have to, kind of figure out how to respond to people, how to deal in social situations, how to make meals that are healthy and nutritious, all that. It's a huge learning curve, very difficult, actually. If we get through that successfully, which is a minor miracle, we get to the second stage of vegan living. That's in some ways even worse. And it's difficult. The second stage is we get into our friend from Australia, she calls it vistopia. This sort of vegan dystopia, Claire Mann. It's basically like we're vegans and we realize, oh my gosh, I try to share this wonderful, uplifting, healing message with people, and they say, shut up, I like bacon, leave me alone, I don't want to hear it. Oh no, why don't people care? Why don't people, so we have this whole idea, like we know how to make delicious meals, we know how to respond to people, but people don't change. And we feel the urgency that people better change because we're destroying this planet and animals are dying every second and we've got to do something. So that's the stage I call the angry vegan stage, because we tend to get angry and frustrated that people don't get it. They don't want to get it. Some people avoid that stage. I call it stage 2A, where they become closet vegans, where they just don't want to talk about it at all and say, just leave me alone, let me eat my tofu and don't talk to me. The good news is that besides those 2 stages, there is this third stage, which I already mentioned, the stage I refer to as deep veganism, which is basically when we do the inner work to understand our own programming and also read the World Peace Diet or somehow understand the bigger picture of the history and the anthropology and the sociology and the psychology and the economic and political and nutritional and environmental, get the big picture of this. And we realize there's no reason to be angry at anybody. This is a cultural it's a massive amount of inertia that's gone through the generations of eating animal foods. It's the religion, the science, the politics. It's just rolling, and it has a huge amount of power behind it. And if we're going to stand up to it, we need to just really rise to the occasion. And I think the best way, quite honestly, to be effective in advocacy is to focus less on trying to change other people and more on just planting seeds of change, right? Planting seeds. And I think the best way, because if someone comes up to me and I can feel they're trying to change me, the natural healthy response is I'm going to fight back and protect myself, right? That's healthy. So if we vegans come up and we're going to change people and we're trying to always give them literature or get them to change, then they feel like, you're so superior, you think you know better. But if we just work, besides giving the information, to try to embody what veganism is. I think that's really the important thing for us now, to embody veganism as awareness, as loving kindness and respect for not only for non-human animals, but for human animals, for other humans, and just tell our story, essentially. Like, I think the elevator version of it would be, I'm so happy that I discovered that the only reason I was eating animal foods was that I was just following orders. I'm not doing it anymore, and it's fantastic. And then just shut up. That's enough. Just that basic thing, because that's true for everyone we meet. If I say that, I'm telling not only my story, I'm telling their story. Because the only reason anyone's eating animal foods is because they're following orders. And if we say, gosh, I just realized I was eating animal foods, and it was just because I was following orders, and then I realized it wasn't a good idea. You can say more if you want, if you feel like that person would be interested in the environmental or the health, whatever, and then just say, I'm not doing it anymore, and it's great. You've just planted a seed and showed them a way out of the prison, right? I'm out of it, I'm free, and you can be free too. And you plant the seed, and without trying to change them, just plant the seed. Like Gandhi called it satyagraha, which means truth power. So just speaking our own truth without trying to change other people, and you plant the seed. And the great irony is that the more I try to change other people, the more they resist and don't change. The more I don't try to change other people and just work on making myself be the change and embody veganism as love and respect, and just exude or tell my story, and however, according to whatever, we all have unique gifts and talents and abilities. So for some people it might be by making food, or by doing videos, or by making music or art or sanctuaries or video, whatever. But embody veganism as loving kindness, then we are congruent with our message. I think that's the key thing. People feel that if we're congruent, if we're living according to what veganism is, as loving kindness and generosity and so forth, then I think our movement grows much more quickly, because the more, if I don't try to change other people, but I change myself, then the people start changing. I think the world in many ways begins to transform as we change ourselves. So I really like to emphasize that point of our own responsibility for psychological and spiritual effort as part of going vegan. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Thank you very much, everyone, for your kind attention. There's more we can talk about, but I want to stop there.
I would like to share that we have lots of videos on YouTube. If you go to worldpeacediet.com, then you scroll down to videos, and then you see some of Will's videos, like interviews and presentations. And then if you look carefully, then you see Madeline's Intuitive Kitchen. And there you can get inspired by nice kind of recipes, some from Switzerland, veganized, even a cake from the 1500s. And other really great recipes which are organic and whole foods. And I take you on a walk on our food forest. We have a food forest with lots of fruit trees and nut trees and vegetables and berries and everything. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Iha. Yeah, so thanks, Madeline. Yeah, so yeah, we do. Yeah, please do stay in touch. We also have an online training if you'd like. A lot of people have gone. We did before COVID. We did quite a lot of trainings. The World Peace Diet Facilitator training, all over the United States. Actually, we would do it's usually a 3 or 4 day training to go deeper into these ideas, and people became certified as World Peace Diet Facilitators. Hundreds. I mean, I could probably maybe over 1,000 by now. But we have it online. If you're interested, you can go through the training, and if you want to go deeper into these ideas and become a vegan coach or advocate and bring in the spiritual as well as the nutritional. There's a lot more technical stuff I haven't covered about nutrition and a lot of other things. The food forest idea, it's based on various threads. In South America, there were apparently, the Indians had these amazing food forests where they really built up the soil, and they had lots of fruit trees, and they mixed it in with other plants, and you kind of walk through and just eat. And even in North America too, apparently. There was quite a lot of food forests here, and then in Japan there's a number of well-known. Fukuoka was like one guy who created this food forest where it's like an ecosystem that's self-sustaining, and food comes out of it. And so the idea is to work in harmony with nature. So for us, it's completely veganic, right? So we build the soil. We have some land. We don't have a lot of land. We only have a half an acre, and a lot of it's really steep. So we can. It's not that big, but it's big enough. Jeff's been there actually. Anyway, it's in Northern California, and we have about 70 fruit and nut trees that we've planted. So they can be planted pretty close together. They like to be close together, actually, and that kind of creates a canopy for shade, which we need in Northern California. It gets really hot. And then we have about 6 vegetable beds where we grow vegetables. We have lots of berries interspersed. And garlic grows well under the trees and other things. And then we have lots of herbs. Madeline's really good on planting herbs. And so the whole thing evolves, and we just keep planting more and more things, and it creates this very concentrated, it's pretty small, but lots of food comes out of it. And the whole idea is that you get sort of beneficial interactions with animals and birds and insects and pollinators. We do drip irrigation, so we try not to waste water, but we do need to irrigate it. And so the idea is to create a harmonious environment. And the underlying idea is that when we do this year after year after year, we develop a relationship with all the trees and the plants and the berries and the bushes and the herbs and all that, so that the food, they get to know us, right? Also, all of our urine, for example, we call that our amber, it's all going in there, right? We mix it with water. So they really know us. And it's very personal. Like these are our plants, our garden. And this is an ancient wisdom that's been kind of forgotten, that when you put your love and your being into growing, the plants respond, and they get to know you, and their fruits and their vegetables and things, they become more and more medicinal. I mean, in the sense that you can't get sick. I mean, you get fed. They know what you need, right? And they focus on that. So there's incredibly intricate, vast webs of life in soil, and so we work on building that microbiome. Building that up with effective microorganisms. It's called compost tea. Just building the soil. And we've been building it now for 10 years, and it's getting really good. So that's the whole idea. The whole idea is that the way we do traditional plant agriculture now is based on animal agriculture, right? Animal agriculture is about dominating the animals and just it's like men's work of just. But traditional plant agriculture was women's work that was done in harmony with nature and based on the beautiful truth that I plant one seed and I get thousands of seeds, right? This natural abundance. So whereas we do most farms now do plant agriculture the way they do animal agriculture, with herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides, and monocropping, and it's a very violent kind of a system. To get away from that and come back to the feminine way of growing food, of listening to the plants, being in harmony with the earth, building the soil, building the microbiome. Because typical agriculture, when you're putting on chemical fertilizers and all these pesticides and herbicides, fungicides, you're killing the microbiome, which is the living soil. It's destroyed. And so the food doesn't have much goodness in it. And that's good. If you want to have a lot of sick people, and that's how you make your money, is on sick people, that's good, right? We got to understand, this is very good. I mean, the petroleum industry created the petrochemical industry, right? So that spreads all the chemicals, fertilizers, they make massive profits on all that. Then out of that came the pharmaceutical industry. It's a branch of the petrochemical industry, the pharmaceutical industry. So you break down the biome of the soil, you break down the microbiome in people themselves, you get very sick soil, very sick people, then they need a lot of pharmaceuticals, you make money on every dimension of it. So it's a perfect system. And then you create war, a lot of money in the war. There's money everywhere. But if we continue on that path, we're not, what kind of world are we going to have for our children? So the whole idea is to decentralize, to take back the power, to grow our own food, to get our own energy, to get our own information. Don't depend on the centralized authorities. Don't get food from somebody else. Don't get information from somebody else. Don't get energy from somebody else. To get it locally as much as we can and support local farmers. So if you can't grow your own food, at least get to know the farmers at the farmers market. But we can grow a lot of our own food, I think, with towers or just something. Just the more we can grow, reconnect, compost all your waste. Build the soil wherever you are. You can build the soil and create a nice ecosystem for the local birds and the bees. They really, they're so glad we have all these flowering plants and all these thousands and thousands of bees come. I don't know what they would have done without us, but they're happy. They got all these things that they can pollinate, right? That's good. Good for them, good for us. So it's a very win-win kind of system to grow your own food. It's a wonderful work. We do it every afternoon. We go out there and do that. So there's whole websites that network the different veganic. It's called Veganic or stock-free. It's called stock-free in England, agriculture. And there's a whole book. There's a book called Growing Green, which is like the Bible of stock-free or veganic agriculture. And the research shows you grow more food without animal inputs, all in all. It's more efficient. So we don't need to use manure and bone meal and blood meal and fish meal. We can just use cover crops. We can build the soil. We do it with wood chips, with effective microorganisms, with lots of stuff like that.
What are the top 5 superfoods that the gut bacteria enjoys the most?
Oh, well, the top 5 superfoods. I guess I think the gut microbiome, it thrives on plant-based foods that have fiber. Right? Fiber is really important. Fiber is a nutrient, actually, and so people who eat animal foods, there's no fiber in animal foods. With fiber are really important for the microbiome. There's starches are good. They love starches. Yeah, oats. The oats is first of all, the most important thing in these 5 superfoods is that they are organic, because glyphosate. This is something like Madeline and I, up until about 3 years ago, we were a little bit casual about buying organic. Now we're not casual. Now we're like insisting, because glyphosate has like taken over the world. That is sprayed everywhere now. And what I've realized is glyphosate is ravaging not only the microbiome of the earth, but also our microbiome, because it's a broad spectrum antibiotic. It kills everything. It kills the bacteria. So as soon as you eat something non-organic and you get some glyphosate, it's going to just start killing your microbiome, the microbiome bacteria. So what they really love is polypeptides, and these come from the natural breakdown of sugar. So organic vegetables, organic fruits, starches, complex carbohydrates. Fiber really gives them the substance that they kind of grow on. And we don't eat that much fiber anymore. Like our ancestors used to eat a ton. Kidney beans or cabbage, right? Yeah, purple, that's true. Yeah, so main thing is organic plant-based foods, plenty of fiber, and you'll have a happy, healthy microbiome. And the neat thing about that is that the microbiome is directly connected through the vagus nerve to the emotional center in our brain, and it just continually stimulates it. If you have a happy microbiome down here, you start thinking happy thoughts, and you start being grateful and happy and sending love to people spontaneously. And if the microbiome, if this community of bacteria is struggling and they're unhappy, they're miserable, they're frustrated, we feel the same way. I mean, it's really interesting. This is only being discovered now. In the last few years, scientists are starting to make this connection that when the microbiome is suffering by glyphosate and animal foods, which don't have any fiber and have a lot of toxins, then we feel on edge, we feel stressed, we feel upset. So that's one of the things a lot of people say when they go vegan, it's like a weight falls off their shoulders and they just feel happier. And I think part of it is that microbiome starts building, and there's just a general sense of well-being and benevolence, and like, wow, what a beauty. You start seeing beauty everywhere. Wow, look at all this beauty. And look at that, wow, look at that bird, that tree. We start to really appreciate and savor the beauty around us. And I think that's so important, because that's what builds the feeling we have of connecting with nature and the beauty of our life. So the microbiome, that's a great question. Thank you for that great question.
May I just add to that?
Sure, yeah.
Just my perspective is that everything is energy, frequency, and vibration.
Right.
And so when people are consuming the flesh of an animal that has, number one, suffered and grieved its whole life because its babies have been taken from it, and died a horrific death, like, it's animal adrenochrome. So there's just no other way to describe it than people are actually eating fear and suffering. And so they're consuming that energy of that animal that has lived that life, and then it's no wonder that they have these feelings of anxiety and fear and all these within them, because you're eating from a being that has, suffered. And
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. I actually wrote, and this is one of the only, some people, this is their favorite book because I have a chapter in here called The Metaphysics of Food. And I'm questioning that, as I said, the materialism. Some people say, I love your book except for that chapter on the metaphysics of food. That sounds kind of out there, kind of like, I don't know, kind of new age or whatever. But I think, listen to this thing. This is Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity. Have you heard of Unity? Anyway, he wrote this in 1903. He wrote this. This is kind of just an interesting thing. In San Francisco a number of years ago, many people were made violently ill from eating meat bought at a certain shop. Physicians investigated, and they found that the carcass of a certain steer was the source, and it was presumed that it was diseased. Further inquiry developed this to be an error. The animal was unusually healthy and vigorous, in fact, so vigorous and forceful that he fought for his life for over an hour after the attempt to kill him began. He was in a frenzy of terror and anger. His eyes were bloodshot, and he frothed at the mouth while the butchers were trying to slay him. The physicians decided that the anger and terror of this steer poisoned his meat in a manner similar to that of the angry mother, her milk, which is well known to make the infant sick. This instance was but an exaggeration of conditions that exist in milder form in all animal flesh offered for food in our markets. Before they are slain, these poor brutes are maltreated in ways almost beyond enumeration. Visit shipping pens, stock trains, stockyards, and packing houses if you want evidence of the sufferings of the poor beasts of the field. And these very sufferings are, through the law of sympathetic mental vibrations, transferred to the flesh of those who eat the bodies of these animals. The undefined fears, the terrors of the nightmare, and the many disturbances in the stomach and bowels that man endures may, in a measure, be traced to these unsuspected sources. So I think, this is 120 years ago, right? People say, that was like the good old days. Everything was free range, organic, And yet he's already saying, look, you're eating nothing but violence and terror and misery, and it's going to make you sick. So that's it. Whether it's backyard farming or factory farming, it's all violence, and you're eating misery and violence. And materialism tries to pretend that doesn't exist. That's the problem with materialism. But like you say, when we look deeper and see the vibrational realities and so forth, then we realize the deeper truth. I think you're right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So let's just maybe close, but just take a moment, just like 1 minute, just feel our connection with this beautiful earth, feeling our connection with each other and with the whole human family and with the whole web of life and with the infinite source of all life, feeling our connection with the cosmos, giving thanks that here we are in this physical body with this precious opportunity of a human birth, dwelling between heaven and earth, partaking of both. And now let's just feel in our heart the love that we have and the sense of caring that we have for not only for our loved ones, but for all living beings. And just from our heart right now, just send forth a vibration and a feeling of loving kindness and compassion, joy and peace out into the infinite web of relations. May all living beings be happy. May all beings be free. May all beings realize the original brightness of their minds and hearts. And may each one of us, when we leave our gathering here, every day connect more deeply with our inner wisdom and our inner compassion and kindness and our ability to be a voice for wisdom and truth, that we may be a vehicle for bringing peace and harmony into our world. And so we just give thanks, knowing that we are part of the solution to the problems here on earth, and give thanks knowing that humanity is awakening out of the delusion of violence and separateness to the truth that we are here with a purpose to awaken and to heal and bless others. Through the power and presence of the indwelling Spirit of Truth, we give thanks, knowing this is so. And so it is. So much love to all of you. Thanks again for joining us, and go forth and multiply the message as best you can. Thank you. Thanks.
So Dr. Will Tuttle is an educator, composer, pianist, and writer. He is author of the international bestseller, The World Peace Diet, which is published in 17 languages. He's a peace activist and has been a vegan for 41 years. He's the recipient of the Courage of Conscious Award and the Empty Cages Award. And he's the creator of the World Peace Diet training programs. He also got his PhD from UC Berkeley, focusing on educating intuition and altruism, which I'd love to hear more about. He has taught college courses in philosophy, humanities, and comparative religion. He's a former Zen monk and Dharma master in the Korean Zen tradition. And he's the co-founder of the Worldwide Prayer Circle for Animals. He's currently conducting a music, art, and education ministry with his spouse, Madeline, a visionary artist from Switzerland specializing in painting that celebrates the beauty of animals and nature. Madeline is also a flutist, a Waldorf teacher, a vegan cook and coach, and an organic gardener.